Welcome into the Dynasty Trading Room. Today, we're going to be breaking down the top 12 2025 Dynasty rookie wide receivers. If you're new here, we'll be looking at these players from a prospect perspective, which means we'll watch the film, combine that with the important advanced stats, and bring you guys what that means from a Dynasty Fantasy Football lens. Starting out as our wide receiver 1 is going to be Tetairoa McMillan, and I don't think there's much of a debate there. You can have him. You can have our wide receiver 2, who I'll spoil, Luther Burden, in that top spot, but McMillan is my number 1 player overall over Genty. That's a debate. I don't think it's much of a debate for him as the wide receiver 1, but I'm absolutely in love with this guy as a prospect. Phenomenal sophomore breakout, what you love to see. 90 catches for 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns, and he is just the nut size. 6'5", 212 pounds, which means he can be a true alpha, the number 1 guy for an NFL team, which is obviously what you want. Some of these guys are probably long-term wide receiver 2s, but McMillan has a ceiling that I don't think many people in this class can match. Ridiculous catch radius, obviously being that big. Reminds me of Drake London and Mike Evans in that kind of sense, but he also has elite yak ability. I don't know if I'd say as far as elite yak. I'd say what's more so elite is the ball skills. I mean, he can high point, he can catch the ball wherever it's thrown, but he has a great yak, and we're looking at this from the perspective of him being 6'5". It just doesn't look right. You just don't see guys moving like him at that size, so he really has groundbreaking fantasy football breaking upside in my opinion. I will say he does struggle to beat press at times. He rounds his routes sometimes as well, which is a bit of a concern. More so the rounding of the routes thing, because he is 6'5", but he's going to need to separate and not just be a contested catch guy in the NFL. But it's just something that he needs to clean up. It's not there all the time. It's not a huge deficiency. At wide receiver 2, we have Luther Burden, though, wide receiver out of Missouri. Now, he's not as big. He's a fine size, in my opinion. 5'11", 208 unofficially. Broke out as a sophomore with 87 catches for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns, but took a step back in his junior year. A lot of that is with the offense. Missouri was terrible. The quarterback, Brady Cook, was really bad as well. So I loved him a lot more when I watched the tape because he creates separation very well. He has fantastic hands. He has great yak as well, and he has good route running. The thing is, he's more of a slot-only guy, which is going to limit his draft capital. McMillan, I think, could go as high as 4th overall in the NFL draft. Burden's probably going to be more around that 20-ish range. So, again, he could play wide receiver 2 role more than likely right off the bat. McMillan, I think, will be drafted to be that alpha. So, with Burden, he struggles to win against press, which is why he primarily plays in the slot, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to play in the slot. In fact, I love NFL players that play in the slot because that's great for PPR leagues. But typically, you like to see that transition happen more so at the NFL level. If they can only win the slot already from college, that's kind of a bad sign. I will say Burden can play on the outside more than people give him credit for, but I just don't think that's where he's going to be used in the NFL because he's significantly better from the slot, in my opinion. The reason why is he has good speed. It's not a big knock, but it's not great. So questions about if that will translate super well to the NFL level where everyone's bigger, faster, stronger. And again, slot receiver, that's the question he's going to have to answer. Where he's drafted, what his role will be. At wide receiver 3, we are going to have Emeka Egbuka, a guy that I've loved for quite some time now. Loved him last pre-draft process, and he decided to come back to school at Ohio State. He's produced with an amazing wide receiver room. This year, you have guys like Jeremiah Smith. I mean, even Carnell Tate is fantastic. Last year, you obviously had Marvin Harrison, and he's still putting up great stats. Actually had his massive breakout as a sophomore. Caught 74 passes for 1,151 yards and 10 touchdowns. When I watch him, I get a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown vibes, and he's similar to Burden where he'll be a slot receiver in the NFL. I'm very confident with Egbuka because he is slower and less explosive than Burden, but I think you still have guys like Amon-Ra being successful. It's just that's, the outlier and not the norm. He's actually a pretty good size, though, 6'1", 205, so he's a little taller, which really helps his, I think catch radius and ball tracking Very good slot receiver. His routes are very crisp from the slot. He has very good hands, like I said, very good at ball tracking. He catches the ball extremely well when it's thrown over his head on a deep ball. Just is able to see that thing into his hands. Very reliable and very consistent. You just don't see a lot of down-to-down struggles with Egbuka. What you're getting from him and what you see on film is what you're seeing almost all the time. He's not a guy that's going to be amazing one play and then the next rep you're like, what's he doing? I think he's polished and ready to produce in the NFL right now. Now, I will say the catch radius is good, but it's not like a Tet McMillan where he's going to be very explosive, jumping up in the air to catch it. He's good if the ball, his hands, if it's thrown around him, he'll come down with that, but he can't necessarily turn an incompletion into a reception, if that makes a bit more sense. His speed is adequate. It's not really slow, but it's slower than Burden as a slot guy, so I don't see him being like that explosive slot guy. Again, I see him being more of an Amon-Ra, and a lot of his production was via gadget plays, which is kind of interesting because he's not very fast, but Ohio State had such a good scheme that they were able to get him open in a lot of different ways against just bad college defense, which did bump up some of those production numbers. At wide receiver 4, we have Travis Hunter, and he's a guy that's going to change a lot. If he came out right now and said that he will play full-time wide receiver in the NFL draft, I would have him above Burden. He'd be my wide receiver 2. He is so incredibly talented. His ball skills are the best I've seen the last 10 years. Unbelievable. He's just a nuts athlete. The issue is he's probably going to be capped in the amount of routes he runs. Right now, I've heard even more buzz about him probably playing primarily corner, which it's looking like he'll play 60-70% of snaps. At the most, he can honestly be used as a guy that's playing only 50% of snaps. He could be used as a guy that's playing in only gadget, set formations for him where he's on the field 5 to 7 times a game with, that kind of positional versatility he has at defense. It's just tough to know because for fantasy football, what he does on defense does not help us at all. And in fact, I would rather have a guy that can be like, a guy like Egbuka who might not be as talented, but we know he's going to be running 80-90% of the routes a game, unlike Hunter. So again, it is a volume thing, but Hunter, I just don't think you can let him slip farther than wide receiver 4 because he is significantly more talented than the guys behind him. And also, there's a chance that he does end up just becoming a full-time wide receiver, in a year or so, in my opinion, because of the money. I think he could quickly realize that here, if I'm getting better at wide receiver in the NFL, I see that I can do it. I think this is where I want to play because that's where the money's going to be. About Hunter as a prospect, unbelievable stats. Won the Biletnikoff last year with 92 receptions, 1,150 yards, and 14 touchdowns. He's a little slender, which is like really the only main knock you can have against him. 185 pounds at 6'1", so he's tall, but he's just not very built. But with the pros, elite athlete, fantastic yak ability, and like I said, unbelievable hands, great tracking as well. Just needs a little bit of polish to his game, specifically his route running, which is kind of odd for a guy that just won the Biletnikoff, but he wins so much in college just because of he's just so much more gifted than all these cornerbacks. So much better hands, so much better jumping, so much better explosiveness, which can raise some questions for translatability in the NFL. I think you will translate. I think the main knock is that just the positional, advantage he has at wide receiver and cornerback, which is actually a positional disadvantage for fantasy football. So we'll see as we get closer to the draft. He will change a lot. My wide receiver 5 is Xavier Restrepo, the other slot guy or another slot guy out of Miami. He's a guy that I've really grown to like for fantasy football. Broke as a senior, so the analytics are not as good, but caught 85 passes in 2023. He was amazing this year. 85 receptions for over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, 5'10", 198 pounds, so really projects he has a slot body. Probably going to be really limited to that in the NFL. Fantastic hands, also a plus yak receiver. He makes stuff happen after the catch. He's also very creative, even though I don't think he is the fastest guy. In fact, I thought his speed was pretty It's not yet a very negative thing, but it's really getting closer to any of the guys that we've talked about prior to him. Has plus ball tracking though, and the thing that he does really well that I like is he's very sudden with his movements, which is very good for a slot receiver. So he's very sudden. He has these quick cuts out of the slot, can make things happen extremely fast like this, and that's how he creates separation. So love to see that from Restrepo. He is not very versatile, but he's great at what he does. Would be fantastic in a good NFL fit. Again, doesn't have great athleticism though, and does have a cap ceiling, which is why I'm only going to have him as my wide receiver 5. Now, my wide receiver 6 is going to be Jayden Higgins, and I have him around the same range as a lot of these other guys, so he can move up, he can move down. I think Restrepo is, Restrepo, Jayden Higgins. The guy we'll talk about after is the next tier of guys. I think Hunter's where that tier break ends. Both Higgins, he's a great size. He's another one of these bigger guys, not a slot receiver. He's at 6'4", 215 pounds, and broke out as a junior, 933 yards, and then had an even better season as a senior with 87 catches for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. With Higgins, good route running for his size, similar to McMillan, uses his body to create separation extremely well. So he knows that he has the size in these guys and use it to his advantage, which is something you try and see a lot of these bigger receivers play like they are extremely fast when they're just not. So that's one thing I love to see. Great red zone threat. He has a plus catch radius as well, so will give you touchdowns, which is very important for fantasy football. Some of the knocks against Higgins, though, is he just has ass speed. It's to be expected, but McMillan's the outlier. Higgins, you're not going to find it there. He's just fine. Wins with his hands, wins with his body control. It's what you expect from a typical X. He's also not a big down the field threat, so doesn't really give you as many big plays. Not great in yak either. He's not very agile, and the main concern I have for him is he needs to clean up those press releases. As an outside receiver, I'm 100% sure that's what he'll be playing in the NFL. If he can't beat these college guys on a consistent basis when they are much weaker and much slower than him versus NFL corners, that could potentially be a very big concern for Higgins. I think the upside's there. There's a lot of things I love, but there's definitely a bit of risk with Higgins as well. At 7, we have Elic Ayomanor, a guy I just made an individual video breaking down. Now, I really liked him, and I thought he was a good player when I watched the first set of film, but the more diving into him, I'm not going to say he's a bad player, but I just like some of these other guys a bit more. So Ayomanor was a true sophomore breakout in 2023 with 62 catches for over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. Another thing that really drew me into him was great size at 6'2", 210, so not as big as Higgins, but he's again, outside receiver, more than likely in the NFL. Very good red zone threat. So, and this is what I thought was really weird, right? I thought he dominated in the red zone, which I'm going to give him a big bump for fantasy because touchdowns are important. I get the stat is volatile, but you're going to find guys that are just good at scoring touchdowns because they'll land on a good offense and they'll be a great red zone threat, which carries over year after year. Not necessarily a red zone threat, but a guy like Jordan Addison on the Vikings consistently scores touchdowns because that's one of the ways he wins. I think I see a similar thing with Ayomanor, but in the red zone. Also, phenomenal body control, smooth movements. I mean, the body control is what makes me absolutely love him, but it's really the main thing that he does well. He has drops and hands issues, which is really weird because it looks like he plucks everything in the red zone, but so many times he just can't hang on to the ball in the intermediate, in the short part of the field when it's contested. So I don't get it there, but it's, I guess, maybe just the spacing of the red zone he is a lot better with. Lacks consistent deep threat ability. I mean, he does show it at times, but there's so many times where he just can't generate deep separation, or if he does, he's just not able to hang on to the ball. He's a one-speed type of guy where he doesn't really do a fantastic job. Like, his movements are smooth, but he doesn't do a great job with the suddenness or like stop-start, which is something I'd love to see more from him. And the main issue is he wins off of body control versus separation. So he's getting away with being bigger than these guys, 6'2", 210, bigger than a lot of college corners. So can bully them, can back it down, can use the body. Looks like he's trying to box out these guys. And it works in college because all these corners are a lot smaller than 6'2". In the NFL, you're going to find a lot more corners that are 6'2", 210, and he can't do that too, which is going to be an issue. The separation is just not how he really wins. Frequently, again, the movements I think are smooth, so it's definitely there, but right now I just don't see that as being a big strength, which really, really scares me about Ayomanor the more I watch his film. So it's going to be really big how he does at the Senior Bowl in those one-on-one routes. Want to see him be able to separate, and I think he could jump Higgins and maybe even Restrepo if he does prove that. At 8, we have Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, and he is a statistical gem. I mean, the yards per route run is the main thing you're going to hear all about Harris, so, we are combining the advanced stats with the film, so I'll bring that up first. And yards per route run is a fantastic metric. It's one of the main metrics that I look at because it's so predictive. Unreal yards per route run mark. 5.25 last time I checked it in, and a 9.25 yards per route run against man, which is just absurd. I mean, these, if you're not familiar, these are top of the class. There's no one better than him in that department, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it's better than some of the massive names we've seen come out in years past. He was a breakout at Ole Miss his senior year when he had 54 receptions for 985 yards and 8 touchdowns. Keep in mind that's also 12 games. But before that, he broke out at Louisiana Tech, where he was very good. It's just the conference was a bit smaller, so I'm going to look at the Ole Miss breakout for the stats, and that's what the yards per route run is referring to as well. He also has great size. 6'3", 210 pounds, so he demonstrated the ability to win as an outside receiver, create separation through a number of advanced techniques. I thought that was really, really nice. I mean, all the stuff you see the guys, sinking their hips, all that kind of stuff in the NFL, he's already doing that. He's ready. He doesn't need to be taught too much. Could definitely get polished, but he has it in his bag already, which is awesome to see. Uses his body to his advantage. Love to see that out of 6'3" guys. Again, hate seeing them play like they're 5'11". Fantastic catch radius. Also a good red zone threat, which is why I really like him because brings touchdown upside to your team. The knocks I have against Harris is doesn't have amazing speed. To be expected somewhat, being 6'3", 210. Struggles against press at times, though, is another concerning thing. I hate seeing these bigger receivers struggle against press in college because it doesn't get any easier in the NFL. And the route running could be cleaner. Being a bigger guy, he does tend to round his routes. So that's the thing I have against Harris. I think that he's going to be another extremely big name to watch. If he tests very well, I could see him flying up boards because his statistical profile is so good. I don't think that his film blew me away, but it was definitely good. So he's a guy, I think he's in that tier with Ayomanor, even Restrepo, Higgins, where I could see him going as high as wide receiver 5 and bumping Restrepo out. At 9, we have Savion Williams, wide receiver out of TCU. And one of our analysts, Drew, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him by now, has him as his wide receiver 3. Did a whole video breaking him down in depth. If you want to check that out, it's going to be a lot more positive than me. I like Savion as well. I think he's a good sleeper, but I'll take him as a great upside shot at wide receiver 9. I don't think I can get to wide receiver 3 yet. However, I'll tell you why Drew has him at wide receiver 3 and why I'm also very excited about him at price. Freak athlete. I mean, best athlete in the class by far. Better than McMillan. He's built at 6'5". He's 6'5", 225. McMillan's 6'5", 212. Probably exaggerated. He's a slender guy. Savion is a built 6'5". And if you guys know what Bruce Fieldman's freak list is, he was ranked 56 on that, which basically combines like size, speed, score, and gets a bunch of his high school and college lifting and explosive metrics. So, I mean, the profile athleticism is unreal, but why I'm taking the advanced stats and the stat production into account is why I have him lower. Never had great production. Best year was as a senior, where he had 60 catches for 611 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. I will say that's lower because they literally used him like Deebo Samuel and as a running back in college already. So that's a plus for him because Deebo Samuel, before he got injured, was very, very good. You're going to get a lot of fantasy football value from that, from the rushing upside, as well as being a receiver. So that's going to be great for NFL teams. That's going to be great for fantasy. As long as he doesn't play like Deebo Samuel this year, I would love that comp for him to turn out to be very accurate. Fantastic speed, great with contested catches, extremely explosive, phenomenal leaping ability, and is a versatile weapon. But the big knocks against Savion and why he hasn't produced yet is his hands are very poor. Struggled with drops. I don't think it's fair to compare him to Quentin Johnston because the two only go to the same school or did. They're very unalike in every other aspect. He has underdeveloped route running. I mean, the route tree is very limited. He just wins a lot from the backfield and just gets schemed up. They just get the ball in his hands, which is understandable, but that's not a foolproof way to translate and win in the NFL. He's also very unrefined against press. Being 6'5", 225, I mean, he should be throwing around these college cornerbacks. He should be dominating. Again, especially at 6'5", 225, that's a massive issue for me. I just want to see more there. He's just a very raw prospect. I get it on being super high in him if you're looking for just unbelievable upside. I think realistically, yeah, he could be a little bit of a worse Ted McMillan. Is that crazy to say that he'll be better than Luther Burden if everything goes right for him? No, not really, because there's just so much that has to go right for him. I'm taking a bit of that into account, and with all the upside there is, he's still my wide receiver 9, so kind of tells you about how refined he needs to get and how raw he is right now. At wide receiver 10, we have a guy that just declared for the draft a few weeks ago, Matthew Golden out of Texas. Made himself a ton of money during that college football stretch. He looked amazing. I watched a lot of those games on film, and I mean, he blew me away. Broke as a junior with 58 receptions for 987 yards and 9 touchdowns. The size with him is just 6 foot, 195 pounds, so don't love or hate it. And with Golden, he's an incredible athlete, fantastic route running, can play in the slot, and that's kind of what I thought I was going to see when looking at his size at first. But he can also play outside because he has plus releases. He can get off the line in a number of different ways, which I love to see. He's a smaller guy and doesn't have trouble with it like these guys that are 6'3", 6'4". So love to see that. I think that says a lot for his potential draft capital. I think I can move him again even higher than a guy like Jayden Higgins if he gets the right landing spot and great draft capital. And also, if I just see, I'm going to watch more film on him. I'm going to see more in the pre-draft process. One of the experts I'm alluding to is Drew, who has him as a top 5 wide receiver in his rankings. So I think he could fly up my boards as well as we talk a little bit more. We see a little bit more film because he's a newer guy that I've watched, to be fair. The knocks against him, though, is he's not very physical. Again, the great size, or not great size, is something that limits him. So I would love to see him kind of just use the effort, fight through contact better, because that's going to be a question you have at the NFL level. Another reason why people were a little concerned about him declaring so early is he had a foot injury in 2023 and hasn't played in more than 11 games until 2024. So there's some durability concerns. I think a lot of guys would have just loved to see it for one more year and then have him declare because, you know, these injuries are scary, man. A foot injury is a tough one for a wide receiver because that affects their ability to turn, move, separate, make sudden movements. It looked good for Golden, but you have the concern of if that just gets banged up in the NFL, you don't know what that means, and that could turn a minor injury to a serious injury with the past injury history. At wide receiver 11, we have Jack Bech. I believe I said that name right. I know people are saying it a lot of different ways, but I believe it's Bech, not Beck. Another wide receiver out of TCU. Another guy I love as a sleeper. Just can't move him much higher than this because of a number of reasons that I'll talk about, later on after I give his stats and his size. Broke as a senior with 62 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. And this dude is a guy that is built. 6'2", 215 pounds, and he looks like a tight end. He's the muscle guy, so don't have concerns about his frame translating to the NFL. And he's very physical at the catch point. Out muscles guys, has the mentality that says, that is my ball. I mean, when throwing him a 50-50 ball, it looks like he's a tight end boxing out a linebacker. That's the type of player that he is. Great hands as well. The route running is smooth, even though he is, more muscular and bulky. He doesn't, run routes stiff. I think the routes come out very smooth, even if he's not an elite athlete. Also very good at finding open space, so I think he could be another slot guy at the NFL level, even though he is a little bit more physical. Now, the reason I have him at wide receiver 11, though, is he's just not a NFL athlete, to be quite honest. Average speed at best. A little bit of concerns about the things he was doing against college cornerbacks. It just was because there was less of a gap there with the athleticism and potentially the massive and way faster corners at the NFL level, more so the faster corners, will give him major problems. So I could see it being an issue with him separating at the NFL level. Fairly unknown press ability, which could be a problem because really only played in the slot. So if a team wants to play him outside because he's bigger, we don't know if he can do that, and it just could be a problem in general because we just haven't seen him do it. So I am a little concerned on that front. But again, it's mainly just the athleticism from Bech because I love the rest of his game. Just have that concern if it's translatable. Rounding things out, our wide receiver 12 is going to be Jaylin Noel, wide receiver out of Iowa State. Noel broke out as a junior with 66 receptions for 820 yards and 7 touchdowns, but exploded as a senior with 80 receptions for 1,194 yards and 8 touchdowns. So the production there, the stats, all look great with Noel. Again, playing alongside Higgins too, that's really impressive that he was able to post an incredible season while Higgins also produced a great season as well. Was actually more productive than Higgins when just looking at counting stats. The size for him is fine. 5'11", 200 pounds. He's probably going to be another slot guy in the NFL, but very twitchy. The route tree is good for a slot guy. Now, I'm not saying he can run every route an outside receiver can run, but he can run the type of routes that you want a slot guy to run in the NFL. He's more of not an Amon-Ra slower, necessarily very slow and not explosive receiver. He's more of that Luther Burden light, where, yes, he'll probably play in the slot, but he can play a bit outside. Like, it's not a zero in his game. And he's also explosive, and the routes are refined from the slot. He's also a plus separator, so love to see that. While, again, playing in the slot, gives you that extra cushion and separation, he can give you more than just the scheme gives him, which you love to see. And also has good hands, a necessity for a slot guy, in my opinion. And just if you want to be a good wide receiver in the NFL. Some of the concerns I have for Noel, though, is he could struggle against NFL corners because played primarily in the slot. When he did play outside, he showed flashes. He just got bullied at times, though, straight up. Played 69.6% of his snaps out of the slot at Iowa State. So he'll have to be put in a good situation in the NFL if he wants to succeed. If they try and make him play as wide receiver 3 on the outside, he's just not going to be that guy for fantasy purposes. And he also doesn't have good blocking. A lot of these guys are adequate. Noel is basically a 0, which could really hurt his draft capital. And I could definitely see him going day 3 just because of that. But he'll be interesting to watch because I don't think he has necessarily speed or NFL athleticism, knocks against him. I think he's adequate or even solid at that, and I'll love to see him prove it during the pre-draft process. But Noel's a guy that I like as a sleeper. Just a lot of questions and concerns that I can't move him much higher than wide receiver 12. That being said, if you guys did enjoy the video, please let me know in the comments. Please like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be notified every time we post a new video. And again, these rankings are going to change. We're still pretty early in the process. FTR is going to see these guys down at Mobile. We're going to be live at media coverage. We'll get to talk to these players. We'll get to see him up close. We'll get to learn so much more in the next week. So our next rankings video, you're going to want to look out for because we'll have even more information. With that being said, I'd love to argue in the comments right now. If you have an opinion, feel free to drop it, and I will respond because I put a lot of time into studying these players, but I don't claim to be an 100% expert on knowing exactly what is going to happen and knowing every little small detail about these players at this point in the process. Again, big thank you to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.